As someone who immigrated from Korea as an adult, I've experienced the cultural dissonance firsthand. So when I plan a course, I don't assume there is one neutral cultural perspective that fits everyone.
I think it's really important to plan well for a class when you know that students are coming from different cultures.
I think it's very important to research who's going to be in your classroom in advance.
I mean, some of the things that I try to do before I even, meet the students for the very first time, that I will read their admission essays and also familiarize myself with their backgrounds, like ethnic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds and whatnot, so that I would go in prepared to engage them with the things that they bring to the class. So maybe it takes more effort and more time on my part, but if I prepare and design it in such a way that would make sense to more people, and I consider that a success.
When I write a syllabus, I think about both the tone and the content. I don't assume that students are already familiar with Western theological frameworks. So I include readings from a range of voices like Korean and Israeli scholars.
So what I look at is the sentence structure and the level of English proficiency that would be needed in order to read the textbook. So I chose a book written by John Collins that has a study guide that goes with it. And in the study guide, one of his students wrote down a lot of vocabulary words and defined them, wrote questions, wrote summaries of texts and pieces and primary materials. And so I felt like that was a better way for all of the students to learn. So what I do is I use John Collins, and then I have other textbooks that are recommended that aren't required that they can look at to see, hey, what does Brueggemann say about this? What does the feminist say about this? What does the African-American interpreter say?
I think how we think about knowledge and learning is important. So if a student can learn from a lecture, learn facts, take careful notes, take an exam, write a paper, that is one kind of learning.
I was educated in Korea, where the system was very hierarchical and lecture-based. So early on, I copied that model. Long lectures, high-stakes exams, and they are very formal. But after I started teaching at Central, with a much more diverse student body, I realized that approach didn't work for everyone.
There have been times when I've noticed as the term progresses that something needed to be adjusted so that some students could really express themselves well in the way that they were comfortable expressing themselves and in a way that would be helpful for their own ministry setting and the settings that they were preparing to enter into. One specific example is that I was teaching a seminary class specifically on the Gospel of Matthew, and as most seminary classes do, the final project was a written paper, Turabian format, well-researched and organized. And I had some students in the class that had really struggled with some of those formal research assignments in the past, but I knew from conversation that they were learning the material well, in fact, maybe better than some others in the class. And so for the final project, we adjusted, and I allowed students to choose whether they wanted to do a written interpretation of a passage or an oral interpretation of the passage. I had 2 students that chose to do the oral interpretation. They were students that had struggled with the written expression earlier, and their presentations, their research, their ability to handle the scripture, it was able to shine in those assignments.
When I taught Korean students, Koreans come from, like I said, just like myself, a culture of low structure. They were brought up in a culture that asking questions was not encouraged. Talking back was something that you should shy away from. And so I try to lay down the parameters and some of the rules and things that I want the students to be aware of coming to my class, and that it's okay for them to maybe take time to formulate their questions, formulate their opinions and ideas. North American students, they are quick to respond and offer insights and questions and comments, but for international students, it takes longer. So I try to be patient, and also if I see a student or two who are not speaking at all, I try to encourage them to speak and remind them that participation is important in class. But I try to do it in a way that honors them and respects them, not necessarily in a way that would penalize them or chastise them.
In a classroom situation where you have students spread all over the country, maybe all over the world, there are going to be students who have very different living situations, very different experiences in their day-to-day life. Sometimes students won't be in safe places that have reliable access to an internet connection or even to electricity in the way that many of us are used to. We just take it for granted.
Well, one of the things that I've done is to survey and communicate with the students themselves. And so one of the things we've done is to create a WhatsApp group. And we did that. That was something they suggested, and that has been an equalizer. We can all communicate together. And so it doesn't replace our email communication as a standard form here at Central. It doesn't replace Populi as our platform for sharing information, but it is an addition that expands our ability to communicate with each other in times where a student may not be able to get into some of those other places. And so there have been occasions when we've been in class and a student's internet was about to go out, and so they sent the group a WhatsApp and said, "I'm about to lose power, but I'll come back in as soon as I can." And so again, it's about building, expanding the model so that there is equity and justice for all of the students.
I've learned that inclusion isn't just about content, it's about access. So my goal is always to remove barriers and make sure students feel supported no matter their circumstances.
So having materials that they can download and that they can read when they are offline, because sometimes they have internet just for half an hour, during the whole day. So they use that time to download materials, and then they can read them offline. So thinking about things like that, it's helpful for students.
Well, one of the tools that I began to use in the classroom based on the students' suggestions and ideas is that we began to record the class, posting it on our platform on Populi so that students could, if they chose, go back and listen to the lectures in the class at a later time. In the course of our conversations about doing on-the-ground peace and justice work, it became apparent that the risks associated with doing the kind of work that we're talking about doing were different for each student. And for at least one of the students in my class at the time, he could actually be arrested for simply having the kinds of conversations we were having. And so once I realized that, I immediately knew that I needed to add a layer of protection around what we were doing in the class. And one of the main things was our recordings. Immediately made that shift, made that change, realized that there were other tweakings that we needed to do for the protection of each of our students.
So when there are uncertainties and also unsafe internet connections and a lot of disruptions and all that, I try to give them as much flexibility as possible so that they would be able to have the kind of the time they need in order to finish the assignments. Flexibility can come in many different forms. One form could be allowing students to send their assignments via email instead of uploading them in Populi, because it takes more time and also more data when they have, shortage of data. So I allow them to submit their assignments via email. And usually they send me emails telling me that they appreciate this flexibility.
And so I think that in education, it's always been important to consider each student as a person and not just as a homogeneous part of a classroom. But in these situations where students find themselves in such different situations, it becomes even more important to treat each person as an individual and to listen carefully and to care for those students as the needs arise.